Hello, in this video I'm going to go through a few tips about literature review, working on the chapter for your dissertation. I'm not going to go through too much theory. I'm going to assume that you've taken a class on literature review. So all I'm going to do is focus on four tips that I personally use when I try to construct a literature review. And a little bit of thinking around what is it really that you're trying to achieve. Now, always consult with your supervisor, your tutor. If you're watching this from an institution in another country, just make sure that you follow advice. Some of the things I might say, some academics might not necessarily totally agree with them, so use them at your own risk. So the first, some of these is technical hints, which might sound very simple, but actually a few of my students have raised eyebrows when I tell them, and I'm surprised by how many of my students don't necessarily know these. The number one is power of word. That's my number one tip, and I'll explain it in a minute. Number two is the power of a reference manager. Number three is the inverted pyramid, and I think a lot of colleagues are probably using this. And number four is really the one criticism most literature reviews seem to get, which is how to show your critical understanding, your critical analysis, if you like, of the materials that you have reviewed. So a little bit about criticality, I guess. Those are the four things I'm going to explore. So let's start with the power of word. So here what I've done is I've just made a dummy couple of chapters, but chapter 2 is going to be your literature review, and you will name this chapter probably literature review and the name of the key theories or theory that you are adopting. Now, why is your first chapter the literature review? Because the introduction really is not going to be written until the end, when you have sussed out everything that you were supposed to do, including really writing all the way to the conclusions. So you go back to your proposal and you take that and construct the introductory chapter at the end. That's my advice for that. So start with chapter 2, your literature first. And what you do with Word is, I've seen a lot of students struggling to do their contents. So all you have to do is highlight the name of the chapter and give it here heading 1. Do that with, let's pretend that you also have your methodology written. So we'll make this heading 1. And then you can do the other headings, heading 2, subsections within the chapter. We'll call them section 2. And if you had another little subsection under key theories, you could have had a heading 3. Actually, let's add one. Let's call this blah. Blah, and then highlight that and make it into a heading 3. Context specific section is another heading 2. So here all you have to do is go to references in your Word document, and you can insert table of contents, and you can choose a tab. I tend to choose classic, and look, Word has created the table of contents automatically for you, and it will keep track of the pages. Every time you make changes, right click and say update field, and we'll get the page numbers right. That's magic, isn't it, for those of you who didn't know? But basically a very, very useful little tool. So this was the power of Word, and basically if you keep on remembering that certain software can do things easier for you, don't waste time by manually creating all this. So if I go here on YouTube, and what I did here is I put the keywords reference manager tutorial, and you can use EndNote if you have EndNote in your own institution, or if you have reference manager or anything really that tracks the references. And then you can go at the end of your document and you can link the reference manager or the EndNote into your Word, and it will automatically be updating the references from the citations. But I'm not going to go into that. I'm just going to say use the power of a reference manager software, because that's going to save you a hell of a lot of time. It might be a bit of investment at the beginning for you to learn, but by the end, trust me, you will not regret this. One of the most common mistakes that students do because they're rushing when they do the references manually is to miss. They cite someone and they've missed them from the reference list. But using a software, you will ensure both that you save time and that you haven't got a single reference missed out. Okay, before we go to tip 3, which is the inverted pyramid, let's think where our literature review stands for an undergraduate dissertation. Now, every writing is part of a continuum from the narrow to the broad. So if you think about a journalistic article, could be very, very narrow. If you think a literature review, likely to be a little bit more broad in general terms. But there is also pieces of work that would be standalone. So here we'll say stand alone. And at the very top is really pieces of work that contribute more generally to the greater body of knowledge. So we'll say here great body of knowledge. Now forgive the handwriting there. Okay, so now let's see if we're looking at super specialized, narrow type of articles or pieces of work that contribute to the body of knowledge. What does that sound like? Well, most journal articles that are using primary, they have their own primary data as well in it. So let's say here, most journal articles belong here. Now, in some cases, I don't think for undergraduate this will happen. Mostly masters might ask you or give you the option to write a journal article. Most undergraduates dissertations will ask you the classic sort of style of a dissertation. Now let's look at something that is narrow and can stand alone. If you think through your work in your undergraduate, and most of your course assignments are right here. They can stand alone. There are pieces of work that a particular module have asked you to do. Right here, stand alone, and it's a little bit more broad. I'd say that some conceptual papers, they can still be journal articles, but tend to be more conceptual. So a paper that uses solely literature review to come up maybe with a proposed model. It will use broad literature, and it could stand alone because it's the beginning of a development of a theoretical model, for example. Now, you also have monographs, and I like to put monographs, I'll just put M right in the middle here, because they tend to mostly be narrow, so you could easily put them there, and they do stand alone. In some cases, you've got some monographs that kind of go a little bit towards the broad, and they certainly stand alone. And some monographs might help you. Look up the word monograph if you don't know what it is, but they can certainly help you with your dissertation. So that's the only place that is left, and this is really where your undergraduate dissertation is. You contribute a bit to the great body of knowledge, and your undergraduate dissertation would have to be a little bit more broad. And the third tip, the inverted pyramid, hopefully will show you what I mean by that. Okay. So here comes the inverted pyramid. This can be used for your literature chapter. I find it quite useful, and it's used for journalistic articles. So what they do is they basically put at the very top of an article, you will find the most important info, what they probably call the lead. The who, the what, the where, the when, the why, and the how. So if you use the 6 W's that I've used as a tip in a previous video, use them here for the lead. In your case, your lead is that big theory or theories that you're utilizing to base your literature review. If you're doing a study in social media and hospitality, for example, the lead might very well be consumer behavior. And then in the middle goes the body, which is all the crucial info. What are the arguments? What are the big debates in the literature? Are there any disagreements? Did you manage to find any gaps? Did you manage to find any issues? And then the final bit is really any extra info, which is called the tail. And right here, you will put your context literature specific to what it is that you study. If you're events, there's going to be literature. If we said here consumer behavior, so this could be consumer behavior if you're looking social media, and then another section on consumer behavior in social media in events or in hospitality or in tourism or retail, whichever it might be. So extra content that you might find that is still relevant goes there. So that's the inverted pyramid. What it means in terms of your section for your literature, as I said here, you will have your big key theory, you will have your debate around the big theory and getting a little bit more specific. And right here, you'll be using a lot of the academic journal articles that are relevant to your work. Now, don't forget your 2 objectives, which this and this should be hitting. So the first objective is about the general theory, and the second literature objective is about context specific. So this and this, the body and the tail, is hitting that second objective. And you got to show in your writing that you actually are meeting those objectives. Which moves us to the 4th tip. How, in this literature chapter, and in subsequent chapters, I show my critical understanding, my insight. Now, what most students do, they replicate, even good students who really have worked hard in reading the literature and they seem to be understanding the literature, they replicate what others have said. Smith, 2010, suggests this and that. Brown's, 2019, disagrees and suggests this and that. And they leave it at that. And that, all it has done is shown that you've read the literature, but you are being descriptive. So you quite often in your feedback you might get, this was rather descriptive, there is no evidence of critical analysis or critical understanding. So here's a simple tip of what you can do. Every paragraph in your literature review is probably going to have a minimum of 2 citations. Now, when you finish that paragraph, think of the one sentence that links the things that you said in that paragraph to the aim and the objectives of what you're trying to achieve for your own project. In other words, so what? What does it mean for your project specifically? So don't be afraid to make the link. Try to do it for every single paragraph. And then at the end of the chapter, when you summarize, use that to try and bring all the information together and then show your insight and understanding that you reviewed the literature and you have identified the key gaps or the consistencies or the consistent message that comes through the literature and how you're going to use that in your methods. The final tip that I didn't say I would do, but I give this to all my students, is create a table. And in one column, you might have the authors. In the other column, you might have the key findings of what they're suggesting in the different articles. In another column, you might have the methods that they used. And you can use that table in your research methods to try and defend one of the keys of defending the methods. But also you've shown in the subsequent chapter that you haven't forgotten about the literature and you're bringing it in, you're weaving it into making key choices and planning what kind of methods you might be using. So that's quite useful. It shows continuity and the link between one chapter and the next. I hope you found this useful. There's lots and more hints and tips. Do a simple search on YouTube about writing literature review. There's some amazing videos about literature review. If you've missed a class on literature review, it's not the end of the world if you actually do a little bit of research before you start doing your literature review. Very, very important that you have a plan, that you have a structure. You've heard a few hints and tips from other academics, and you try to synthesize what you think are the best tips, and you do your best to do a really good literature review. Your literature review is your stance, okay? It helps you create your thesis, so where you stand with your overall dissertation. So similar with martial arts, before you can punch and before you can kick, make sure you know how to stand. Chapter 2, one of the most important chapters in your dissertation. Use it to also get feedback from your tutors. Send them a draft well in advance, then go and meet them, and then ask them for feedback on your writing style, anything else they can give you. That'll be most useful for you, I think. All the best. Good luck.